Hello and welcome to Soberania, the Mexican Politics Podcast. We're bringing you a special episode here, live from Mexico City, from the heart of Mexico City. We actually just got back from the opening demonstration for Claudia Sheinbaum's presidential campaign. An extraordinary turnout. I would say it probably exceeded organizers' expectations in terms of the mass amount of people. It was very, very difficult to get in, very, very difficult to get out. We haven't seen any official figures, but if I were wagered to guess, it was probably as big as a demonstration that happened here not too long ago on March 18th last year. And they said that that was upwards of 500,000 people. So somewhere around those lines is likely going to be the estimated turnout. Extraordinary event, a very clear, concise political message from Claudia Sheinbaum explaining 100 points, a very much a front runners kind of campaign launch. You know, nothing too extraordinary, no surprises from her campaign. I think in a lot of ways, her messaging is we're going to build on everything that was done successfully, and we're also going to try to introduce the things that she did as the jefa de gobierno, the mayor of Mexico City. But I'm joined today, actually, with a special guest. You know him, of course, it's Kurt Hackbarth from Sentido Común. Switch it over. Kurt, how are you today? Kurt, what did you think? First impressions from the demonstration.
Well, as we were talking about on the way back to the hotel, I think it's really hard for Anglo-American audiences to conceive of, the amount of numbers we're talking about when Morena calls for a rally. This means that Mexico City effectively shuts down for the entire afternoon, right? And it's not just, one hear a speech. There are people on stilts. There are bands in every corner, right? There's music. There's it becomes, they close the streets. It becomes a party. Right? And I think this is a big show of political muscle on Morena's part. One of the ways the right wing in Mexico is always used to say, well, this is always just, it's a one-man show. It's a cult operation. It's López Obrador. So every time Morena can, fill the Zócalo, and it's not López Obrador on the stage, it's Claudia Sheinbaum, right? That's a big message, right? As you say, the crowd going in today was like, whoa, both going in and coming out.
You said it kind of reminded you of a mosh pit.
Yeah. Yeah, at moments it was really kind of, ooh, boy. As you said, Sheinbaum was definitely a front-runner speech. It's very much in the line of continuity and building on the first sexenio, right? The idea of the segundo piso. Right? So, of course, talked about AMLO's major programs, but there was definitely a Sheinbaum accent to these 100 points. She talked, for example, about literature and making this a republic of letters. Right, which is not something you'll hear in a López Obrador speech usually, right? She talked about bringing art and sports into schools, right, and actually extending the school day so there's art and sports education. She talked about the importance of water, right? She's a climate engineer, and how that's going to come with climate change, an increasing issue, just as now almost the entire country is facing drought conditions, right? She talked about, as you said, security and her role in reducing crime in Mexico City. And there was a huge focus on women, for very clear reasons. Mexico, in a question of the month, is going to have its first female president. One of her big policy announcements was that women between 60 and 64 will get a payment, which is about half of what the universal pension would be. So it's basically bringing the pension age for women from 65 down to 60, and they would get a reduced amount, which would then kick in fully at 65. There was a big accent on women's issues, based on her experience, in Mexico City, with regards to having women MPs in the Ministerios Públicos for prosecutors, setting up an SOS line, tackling feminicides, right? All of this is the Sheinbaum accent, obviously, on the 4T, right? Talked about bringing the trains back, bringing a new network of infrastructure and roads, right? And a big emphasis on sustainable green energy production, but within a public framework, right? Not a greenwashing setup where private companies can cannibalize the grid for their own purposes, right? But a green, sustainable economy based on a public model. So that's the speech, and well, you've heard from the two of us. So now we have another special guest who's here in Mexico and joining us in the podcast today to give another perspective on how it all went down today.
Yeah, so I was absolutely.
Just introduce yourself a little bit first, right? So audience knows
My
you.
name's Camila. Camila Escalante. I'm a journalist, editor of Casacho News, and correspondent with Press TV. And I'm based in Managua, Nicaragua. And it's fantastic being here this week. It's incredible how many people turned out. I think that it was far more than anyone would have imagined. And I was just looking through social media to try to see like what the drone shots were, and they're only drone shots that show the actual plaza. They actually don't go beyond the plaza. It was miles of people in every direction because I got up by the stage, but I actually had to come on the metro. I had to wait for 4 subways to be able to jump on. It was that crowded. Everyone was heading there. I had already been warned, but I still ended up stuck on the platform trying to get down to the location. And it was just tons of people. Obviously, social movements, other political parties that are supporting this ticket, and in their delegations with their banners. Absolutely massive. So I think that it's undoubtedly AMLO and Claudia Sheinbaum are 2 of the most popular politicians right now in the world. Yeah. And it's really difficult to argue with that. It's if you talk to people here, if you just see how many people everywhere are wearing the Morena stuff, and I don't think that, well, the West has even any politician that could compare. I don't think there's anyone with that level of support in all of Europe and the rest of North America. So it was really just unbelievable. And so I think, it just shows that that AMLO is leaving office, having really done his job in terms of how people see his administration, his years in office, and they're extraordinarily pleased with it, and they want a continuation of that. That's what everyone says, both here and also her Mexican comrades who are on the exterior in other parts of the world, in the U.S. and Canada and beyond. They're also hugely in favor of this ticket. So it was really great to be there.
One of the things I wanted to ask you, you have a world of experience. You've covered elections all over Central America, Latin America, even beyond. How does it compare to some of the things that you've seen in other places? What you just witnessed here tonight, Mexico City, the Zócalo, the Centro Histórico, just absolutely filled to the brim.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was thinking about the whole time. I was thinking, where have I seen this many people pouring out in all of the streets where there's almost no bicycle past the massive crowds, and I've seen large support obviously for Lula's return in Brazil. I've been to Chavista marches in Caracas. I've been to huge concentrations in Bolivia of the indigenous and campesino movements of the MAS. But I think this is just an incredible amount of people. Obviously, this is a really big city, but I don't know if you mentioned this, but I tweeted it, and I took a bunch of videos on my phone here, but the one that this one that I absolutely love, if I can just show it to you guys, is this. Well, there's some really good banners. I love like all the banners that people bring. This one was it says Primero los pobres. Did you see that one?
Yeah, that giant one in the back.
And there are many other ones as well, but I mean, it just shows that that's kind of the theme. It's like, this is a government for the vast majority of Mexicans. How can you argue with that? How can you argue with the polling numbers? And so I was very pleasantly surprised with all of the project of nation points that she presented, which Kurt just outlined. That's absolutely incredible. And obviously it's really difficult to run an election campaign. You can't just say whatever you want. You actually have to be a little bit. That's maybe why we don't hear huge pronouncements on some things like Gaza and solidarity with certain other peoples or countries. You have to be very careful. But on a whole, I think that the Mexican government of AMLO has had very positive relationships with all of the countries of the region. That's what Xiomara Castro today in SELAC was stressing, was that we need to fortify the relationships with the rest of the countries. Obviously integration, they're always talking about in SELAC, but without going to the United States, without going outside of the bloc, we need to strengthen those relations. And obviously in the case of Bolivia and the coup, Mexico was so important because it offered asylum protection for Evo Morales, our leader, and all sorts of other persons as well, including Ecuadorian politicians who received protection here. And so that's what Mexico is known for, and it seems like that's what Claudia intends to continue and why people are supporting.
I wanted to add a couple of comments myself. What I found particularly interesting from my point of view, just speaking with people very casually, is the level of political consciousness that exists in the population here in Mexico. One of the things that what was highlighted just now was primero los pobres. There's a very clear identification about the qualitative difference that a Morena-led government actually means for the people. And I think that's what we saw from the population, and based on the responses, all of them said, we're looking for continuity. She is a candidate that can continue to bring this project forward. We believe in her. She did a good job here in Mexico City. We hope that she'll do the same. And, there's a lot of trust in her as well. I think, obviously, López Obrador is not running for re-election, but in a lot of ways, this is a bit of a referendum on his government. And if that is the case, he has overwhelming support. And I think that's very clear. I think there's a tendency among some people to want to look at things in a U.S. lens, which is to say that, the polling numbers can change rapidly. The election officially begins today, March 1st, but, there's many months ahead of campaigning, and that can change people's opinions. But I think talking to the bases today, to the people who took the time out of their day to be here, as Kurt said, right, it basically shuts down the city for an entire afternoon, to go through the effort of being there, to make sure that they feel recognized by being present. It shows that those poll numbers aren't going to change. And this election is very much shaping up to be a bit of a dirty campaign. And I think if that's the strategy that the opposition wants to go down, if that's the path that they pursue, which is try to, mud everything up with sling a lot of dirt, it's going to make it an election that is largely going to be determined by who can mobilize the base, who actually has more support and is able to get them to turn out. And I think the opposition is going to end up being somewhat demoralized as a result, because they're going to see that their polling number isn't going to change much, and then so they're going to abstain from actually going out and taking time of their day to go and vote. And instead you have a very well mobilized, very conscious pro-government side, pro-Morena side, that is very much going to do what it takes to win. And if that continues to play out that way, then what we're actually going to see is a huge gap between first and second place, possibly the biggest in Mexican history. That's what one pollster said from De Las Heras, that this could shape up to be an election where the first place winner wins by historic margin, although maybe voter turnout's a little bit lower than usual because of the dirty campaign that most people are expecting. But again, if that is the circumstance, is that what people think is going to play out, then it actually bodes well in Morena's favor, judging on the impression that I got from people, that they understand that this is about continuity, this is about keeping this project forward, about keeping the people they call corrupt out from returning to office, returning to power, and to be able to continue. I heard a lot of conversations from people about deepening the process. And when Claudia Sheinbaum talks about the second floor, segundo piso. And so I think that even though it was very much kind of like a safe speech, saying these are the things that went well and these are the things that we want to build on, there is very much a sense that this is a political decision between two forces. There's the Morena forces and their allied parties, and the opposition, which represents neoliberalism, a return to the past. Kurt, I wanted to get your feedback as well in terms of what was your takeaway from people, talking to them on the streets, the mood, the signs you saw from the crowd.
Well, remember in the last podcast episode, we talked about the conservative march a couple of Sundays ago, right? Very white, very old. I mean, not, just median age 50 and over, and very angry, right? We talked about, that sign, right? It's not the fault of the Indian, but the people who elected him. Just using words like Indian in 2024, right? This idea of it's whiter because people are more educated, right? As we saw in that Herman Gomez interview, right? what you saw today is a march that looks so much more like Mexico, right? A country that's 80% mestizo and indigenous, right? People from all walks of life. Morena's a cross-class, right? Cross-ethnic coalition, and it's just a much happier experience to be at one of these rallies. People will just come up, people will talk to you, right? We hadn't barely gotten into the crowd, and somebody was coming up to us and saying he was from the Otome, what was the region there?
From Hidalgo, state of Hidalgo.
The Otome region there, and that he'd come, 6 hours. They'd rented a bus to come to the rally, and they were going to go back and go to their assembly and talk about what they'd seen. I talked to people who, as you said, a high level of political consciousness. I saw one sign which specifically said DEA and CIA, stay out, butt out of this process, right? So that's when, both of you have mentioned that it's like the numbers exceeded expectations today. I'm wondering if this latest string of hit pieces from the US hasn't totally backfired, right? Gotten more people out, roused, gotten people's dander up and aroused more of a crowd, right? Because, it was huge out there today. And the New York Times and those other hit pieces were mentioned, right? And I think another point, we saw it's kind of a tale of two rallies, right? A rally that's kind of older, whiter, and angrier, and a rally that's more diverse, happier, and younger, right? All ages, right? This is also a rally of proposals, right? Here you see, I think, Claudia playing to her strengths. This is someone who, is a serious politician with serious experience, right? Governing a delegation of Mexico City, the mayor of Mexico City. Obviously, she has her advanced study in climate change engineering, her doctorate, and has been on the UN climate change panel, etc. Against someone like Xochitl Gálvez, who's been clowning it up the last few weeks, right? Sticking gum on chairs, kind of these weird dance things to try to escape migrants in New York City, kind of playing the fool. What you see is someone here in Sheinbaum who's obviously clearly very carefully studied what's done well in the Cuatro T, what needs to be done, and it really laid out a discourse of expanding rights, right? Right when you have conservative commentators like Sergio Sarmiento saying, water isn't a right, in the middle of a drought, right? Water isn't a right. She says, no, education is a right. Healthcare is a right, right? Water, right? Vivienda, a dwelling. That was a big, another plank that she mentioned today. This idea that's laid out in AMLO's constitutional reforms of building half a million homes over the next sexennium, and not by private industry. The public agency and Fonavit will build housing, and then workers with, as long as you have a year of in the Fonavit system, and then rent with a social rent of no more than 30% of your income for 10 years. After that time is up, you then have the option to use all that accumulated rent that will go toward the price of the house, and you can buy that house. This is practical solutions to real problems, right? Housing has gotten very expensive in Mexico, right? And the previous attempts to build housing through private agencies in the Fox administration was a total disaster, right? With the with all those ghost towns basically been abandoned, right? So this shows, and there have been all these forums over the last several weeks on all of these issues, right? I went to a few of them. This shows a campaign that's serious, that's laying out a program, that's trying to expand rights, compared to a campaign which is going in on trying to get the U.S. to put their finger on the scale openly, trying to find ways to sully the election or even get it annulled through provoking violence, their own violence that they caused through their own drug war, using that now to try to invalidate the election, or to find ways to say, oh, well, this is going to be a narco election or an election of state. And it's not above these people that if Moreno wins by a large margin, which looks very likely as things are now, they're going to try to use that against Moreno to say, that's impossible that they win by that kind of a margin. But if you were out at that rally today and you saw the enthusiasm, you saw the numbers, you can see that those numbers are totally legit, right?
Absolutely. I want to come back to you and get some final thoughts, but I thought I would ask Camila if you would be interested in sharing your own thoughts. Basically, around there are some people who are skeptical that there actually could be foreign interference. In the episode, Tyler talks about how he's friends with Joe Biden and they have a positive relationship. In fact, Mexico this year displaced China as the #1 trading partner. So it's a very close relationship. Some people, why would the U.S. want to interfere, or why would rogue agencies or rogue agents inside of DEA want to interfere? Help, someone who has a lot of international experience, has seen U.S. imperialism intervene repeatedly throughout the region. Help us understand why that's actually still very much a possibility here in Mexico.
Yeah, the U.S. is losing its grip of all of its main strongholds, all of its main countries that it has, plopped down on, has opened all of those military bases. And so it is scrambling to find allies anywhere, or make allies, or put their allies in governments, and has turned back to Latin America as its focus. And, we have seen, more and more pronouncements from Southcom, from General Laura Richardson, the commander, U.S. Southcom, and it's very obvious that they are looking to these sort of possible allies in Latin America to try to pick themselves back up. They know that even their closest allies historically and presently have opened relations now with China. They all have major projects, as is this country, major development projects with China. And they also didn't take the correct line on Russia. They were either neutral or surprisingly pro-Russia in our region. And Mexico would be one of those countries that was, somewhere between neutral and pro-Russia in China, and has maintained friendly relations with, other countries of the global south and the declared enemies of the U.S. So they're going to see what they're going to do to try to maintain a grip. But I think that what's really interesting is walking around this massive concentration of people, again, seeing those signs. I saw signs that were lumping in the right-wing parties here. They had like a sign with the faces of the figures of the right-wing parties and their actual logos, and then a logo of the DEA and of USAID and of Zelensky,
right,
and of other Biden and others. And so it's like everybody knows what's going on. That's very dangerous for the U.S., fortunately, because people here have a higher rate of political literacy. People they have some sort of if not political formation, then at least they know why they support their government and why they're going to support this ticket as well. That's not the case everywhere. You could have a very popular politician and government, not to name any countries in particular, and people don't really know why they support them. It's kind of just a fad, or sort of a cult personality thing. But in this case, it seems like people are very clear, and Claudia, of course, spoke about no privatization. Those are the sorts of things that people want to hear. And so undoubtedly, the U.S. will congratulate, the Morena government when it's elected. And I think that they're going to try to keep things on a friendly tone, especially in the beginning. But they're doing probably everything in their power right now to make sure it doesn't happen.
And Kurt, final thoughts.
Final thoughts. To go back to your first thought, when you're 30 points ahead, what you want to do is create a sense of inevitability. Claudia Sheinbaum has been on the airwaves this week, and though she hadn't gone to mainstream Mexican media, didn't need to, she did go on to some mainstream shows this week with Joaquin López-Dóriga, and others. And they tried to, of course, rattle her a little bit, get her off her game. And she just showed herself to be very calm, centered, right? And you could tell that they didn't hit her with their hardest stuff, because they even, seem to be falling into line with what seems to be an inevitable election. So that's what you want to do if you're strategizing a campaign that, is trying to build on a successful previous administration. You create an aura of inevitability. So you hear from Claudia today, starting, on October 1st, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. The next program is this. The next program is this. We're going to do that. the engineering part, this is that. We're going to, and then, a list of trains, a list of highways. I mean, it was just, an abundance of detail, right? She's going to at some point have to answer some harder questions about, her stance on Gaza and other things, and should have to. But for today, this was, I think, a very successful start to the official campaign season.
And I would tend to, I think this is going to be a really exciting set of a few months to come in terms of what's going to be happening, all the discussions. There was a lot of talk that I hope that this will be the kind of election that is about policy proposals, that is about what is the best actual choice for Mexicans in this country, Mexicans abroad who can also participate. As a message to those of you who may be watching us from the United States and Western Europe who have the opportunity to vote. Of course, there are lots of organizations happening now. The deadline to register has passed, but that option is available to those who were registered. And my final note would, I guess, be this. I don't think the campaigns could have started any differently. Well, we had Xochitl Gálvez quite literally in the dark, starting her campaign, surrounded by very few people. In fact, the representatives of the political parties who were putting her forward did not even accompany her on her official launch. In person there was her campaign coordinator, Santiago Priel, who's actually been kind of missing in action as of late. So it's interesting to see him finally show up. And then you have the contrast of today, a huge, massive, possibly upwards of 500,000 people coming out. I saw a comment on social media saying that, this is the electoral left flexing its muscles and showing us that somebody other than López Obrador can fill the Zócalo. And it happens to be a woman with a very interesting long career. And interestingly enough, who introduced her? It was Clara Brugada, the candidate for Jefa de Gobierno. Also a woman, also someone who's done extraordinary work here in the capital, who's also leading by 15, 20 points in the polls, very likely to win as well. So, there was even the world's worst journalist in Mexico, Carlos Loret de Mola, who was trying to suggest that there was a schism between the two camps, suggesting that she was actually flirting with the opposition candidate to see if they could make some peace in case, both of them win. I think the message sent today was that no, they're together, even though they do come from different camps inside of Morena. Obviously, they're presenting a united ticket. And I think that's also going to be something we're going to hear a lot from the Morena team, which is unity. We need to win down the ballot. I heard a lot of talk about Plan C or Plan C, which is basically try to win a super majority, a qualified majority in the Congress, so they can make the electoral or all of the constitutional reforms that they've talked about doing, that they've had to negotiate with the opposition previously. Well, if they win a super majority, they won't have to, and I think that would actually really quite accelerate a lot of the transformation that is happening here in Mexico. So this has been Soberanía, the Mexican Politics Podcast. I was joined by Kurt Hackbarth and Camila Escalante, who graced us with her presence, a talented journalist covering Latin America, and of course, Hackbarth from Común, Jacobin Magazine, and I'm Jose Luis Granado Ceja from Mexican Solidarity Media.